Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm audible and visible, right? Yes, great. So, peasant and tribal movement. Today's agenda is very straightforward. Hereafter, from tomorrow, the concept is going to totally change. This is the last descriptive module that was tribal and peasant, and technically three types of rebellions we will discuss. But as I said, tomorrow we'll start 1857 and we'll be at the halfway point. We'll be at the halfway point. If you actually realize and look at the basic timeline which we have to cover, we have actually not even reached the most significant portion that we have to start. Will start from tomorrow because the dates till this point are quite compact. It's after 1857 that the date starts to open up, and therefore and therefore the national movement from 1885 will start to become the most important thing which we discuss. So today we will start a theme which is called resistance to Raj, or resistance to the Raj. And the first topic within that is tribal and peasant movements. Thereafter 1857. And then we will go into early nationalism and then nationalism. So our orientation will change very dramatically and very quickly as we go on further. So this is the basic agenda as of right now. So we'll wait for 1 to 2 minutes and then we'll let everybody join in. Yes, British Raj only. That is what you're discussing for the past. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning. We'll wait 2 minutes and then we'll begin. Yes, Bhadwaj, not an issue that was. Okay. Good morning, good morning. The A is am also matters in answer writing. Yes, that is the most important. A lot of you send me the tables, very good. I saw them, very encouraging, right on track. Okay, good morning, good morning, good morning. One more minute and then we'll begin. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Okay, so resistance to Raj. See, if we look at our basic thematics, we started at Advent, then we went to the concept of expansion, then we saw consolidation. Once we saw consolidation, we saw economic policy, then we saw social, educational, finally socio religious reform, and we enter a logical end to our first part of the story, which is called resistance to Raj. So the British had been here since properly if we count it from 1757. And since 1757 itself, there was a certain feeling that resistance was happening, was there, but very fragmented. What do I mean by resistance? That there's a very simple logic that if the British were following these policies, these different policies, for example, was there any opposition to it? Was there any form of resistance to this act? And there was. There was. And today, what we are doing is we are consolidating all that resistance and trying to understand it first in three forms. And thereafter, tomorrow, we will do the epitome of resistance, which is the 1857 revolt. The revolt of 1857. But today's agenda is to understand again the concept of rebellion, concept of peasant and tribal revolts. Three forms it took. But I have to first explain to you what these words mean, which is rebellion, revolt, though I do it more in more detail rather when we talk about revolt of 1807, but I'll give you a basic understanding. So if you can see, I've used two very basic words. One is called rebellion and the other one is called revolt. The words basically are rebellion means to resist and fight for concessions. You want something, so you fight for it. Revolt is to overthrow and challenge the power. And there's one more word which you will come through today, which is called mutiny. Mutiny basically is a revolt in the army. So when the army or military revolts, it has been given a specific word which is called mutiny. Mutiny is a very specific word for military based resistance or military based revolt. On the other hand, revolt is to overthrow, rebellion is to get concessions. This is the basic idea you need to have vis-a-vis these words. But as I said, this resistance will take three different forms and will be there since 1760s itself and will go on till 1850. So for 90 to 100 years, we saw certain type of resistance which happened and kept on manifesting itself in the form of different type of rebellions and revolts. But there's a problem in them that does not allow them to be the revolt of 1857 or does not allow them to be successful. So the first point is that we are very simply logically moving in a certain direction. We started with advent, we now came to expansion, then we saw consolidation, then we saw economic policy, then the education policy, then social justice reform. And now we are consolidating everything. In the past 100 years, what was the resistance to the Raj, if there was some? And why is that the peasant tribal revolts, the rebellions generally were not that successful, or what were their limitations? And tomorrow we'll do the epitome of the first major challenge to the British, which is going to come in the form of the revolt of 1857. And we will basically reach halfway point, because after the revolt of 1857, crown rule, company rule will end, crown rule will start. So the three words which I'm going to use generally today, mutiny not today, tomorrow, is revolt and rebellion, which is resistance for concessions. Revolt is overthrow a power, a challenge to a power. So are we clear with regards to a general progression of syllabus? How are we going in a certain direction? And what is the basic point vis-a-vis? Where are we going in the larger context of the national movement or modern India in that regard? So we are very systematically moving one step further. And today we start a totally new theme which we have never discussed till this point, which is resistance. Now, there are two very important disclaimers about this theme. Much like the social justice reform movement sector, it is also descriptive. So there are two type of questions which can come from this area. One's a mains question on why and what are the limitations. And second type of question will be prelims oriented, which could be the reason and the rebellion. Why did the rebellion happen? Statement based questions. So again, it's going to be a little bit more descriptive. Here also the table is going to help you, but I am going to also give you a basic understanding of how to do the condensation of data. I'll do it for one section. You can see it for others. As it is for tribal, I've made the tables already. So in the tribal section, I'll show you that basically in the tribe section, everything is already made. So these boxes are already made for you. So you don't have to worry in that regard. It's only the peasant area where you need to be a little bit more attentive. Half of the work is already done. So here, where I knew that it was multiple, I have done it already. Now, if we understand the context, if we understand these words, can I start the reasons and why and what are the limitations? Yes? Okay. So we start our story now. So there were three types of resistance, each based on a different pretext. First, which would be the concept of generic rebellions, then peasant movements and revolts, and you have tribal revolts. The right word which we can use for peasant is going to also be rebellion, because it's not revolt which they went for. What do I mean by generic? Generic means that they are not peasants, it's generic, meaning it can be anybody. This is specific peasant, this is specific tribal. Now, if we look at the reasons, here it was basically colonial policy or impact of British policy. On the other hand, peasant obviously are going to be impacted by the economic policy of the Raj. So you have, for example, land revenue settlements, commercialization, deindustrialization, drain, famines. And tribal revolts, on the other hand, are actually linked to the concept of tribal policy, the economic policy, but more specifically the forest policy. The forest policy. So very simply, there are three very simple generic reasons for three different types of manifestations. If you look at it, the reasons are basically colonialism. When colonialism comes to India, it basically impacts everybody in a different way, and that in turn leads to three manifestations of rebellions, and we will discuss each of them separately, and we'll discuss why are they important also in your larger preparation, which is generic rebellions. For example, we'll start with sannyasi, then peasant movements. For example, you have Pabna or Deccan Riots, and tribal revolts, for example, Munda. So, for example, the simple point is we have something common: economic policy, colonial policy. It is the impact of the British to be here. Now, the problem with this resistance, we understand the policies. This is what we've been doing for now close to 10 and a half classes, that we understand that they have a certain set plan to exploit India, and that is going to impact each and every part of India in a different way. Rather, what is more important is why are we not calling them, for example, nationalism? Why is that none of them are in themselves called revolt of 1857? What are the basic limitations or what is the problem in these rebellions if you understand the basic point of their origins? We'll discuss separately when we'll go into the sector itself. What I want you to understand right now is what is their basic limitation. So when there's a question vis-a-vis why was there resistance, the answer is very simple: because of colonialism, its policies, economic policy, tribal policy, forest policy. But what are the limitations is a more realistic and more important question. Can I talk about the limitation or rather the ideological context which will limit the whole sector or this whole resistance in that regard? We can. You understand the basic point: rebellion, peasant, tribal, based on colonial policy, economic policy, tribal policy, forest policy generally. Now, the limitations are more telling. The limitations are much more telling in that regard. Why? Because what we see is that the problem with all of them is that they do not understand the nature of exploitation or colonialism. Each one of them, be it officials, be it landlords or money lenders, or be it forest officers, they all targeted the agents of colonialism, but never colonialism itself. They targeted the agents of colonialism, but not colonialism itself. It's a very important point you need to understand. See, here the hatred is toward officers. Here it is hatred towards the officers or the bureaucracy. Here it's landlord or money lenders. Here it may be forest officers. But the problem is that though they are technically going after the officers, landlords, money lenders, forest officers, they don't understand that they are not the reason why they are in that state. The reason is the British, not these agents. But what they do is that once they get a concession, from the British, the issue is resolved or stops being relevant. Except for 2-3 tribal revolts, none of them actually understood that what basically is the core cause of their misery. So when they were going after officers, when they are going after landlords, who made the landlord so powerful? Who made the landlord so powerful? The British. But according to them, the problem is not the British. According to them, the problem is the landlord. So the point is that they don't understand one thing, that very simply they are trying to basically chop the different branches of colonialism, which is landlords, money lenders, officers, economic policy, forest policy, they all are not understanding one thing, that the problem is the trunk. So most of them are trying to chop this off. But if the main source is going to remain, it will actually not work. It will actually not work, because in this tree of colonialism, cutting off a branch is not going to work. So they are going after the intermediaries or the agents. They are not going after colonialism itself. The root cause is British colonialism, the British being here. The simple point of the matter was that they should, this is where 1857 is different, because 1857 tries to cut the root itself. The root being this concept of the British presence and rule. In order to remove the British from, in order to remove their misery properly, you should not go for the branches. You have to go for the roots and the trunk. And they do not have that sophisticated understanding of their misery, because what will happen is that they will go to the British for help itself. The British creates the intermediary which impacts them, but they go to the British to get certain forms of concessions. So according to them, the British is not the problem. The problem are these intermediaries. Not understanding one thing, that it is this British colonialism which gives power to these branches. So when we talk about the resistance to Raj, or the initial resistance, peasant and tribal movement, the problem here is very simple, which is that they all are based on certain grievances which are generally linked to colonialism, but none of them actually target the main cause of colonialism, that is their limited vision. The problem is called the limited vision, limited understanding and vision of colonialism. Understanding and vision of colonialism. Herein, that is why 1857 is considered such a major moment, because 1857 tries to go for the trunk. But the problem with 1857 is totally different. I will discuss that with you when we will discuss 1857 tomorrow. The simple point of the matter is the trunk still remains, and this is going to be a major issue. And the person who actually made us realize or gave us the structure of the tree, who was that person who actually made us realize or gave us that major understanding that okay, this is how colonialism works. Who is that personality? Not Gandhi, not Mangal Pandey. Yes, very good. Sitha, very good. Aditi, very good. Perfect. It is, yes, Santosh. It is Dadabhai Naroji. Dadabhai Naroji, G.V. Joshi, M.G. Ranade, and R.C. Dutt. They technically, these are called economic nationalists. They were the ones who were able to explain to us that, see, this is the structure and this is how we are getting exploited. So it is not these smaller policies, it is rather the British which is the problem. And that is why their vision, their economic critique is going to become the base for our early nationalism. So what have we discussed till this point? We've discussed 2-3 very important points. First is that what are the reasons, which we will discuss separately also. It's either colonial policy, it's economic policy, it's forest policy, tribal policy. But the problem of their basic agenda is that they are targeting the intermediaries rather than the reason. Therefore, the agents of colonialism are getting impacted, not colonialism itself. And the basic point of the matter is that they are not understanding the mechanics of how this whole process of exploitation works. And this may be called the limited understanding and vision of colonialism, which these peasants, tribals, and generally not tribals, but more specifically peasants, and the concept of what we call as the basic rebellions which are there. So, if this makes sense, I'll then enter into the first section, which is rebellions, and then we'll go into the concept of peasant rebellion, then tribal. Is this making sense? If somebody asks you, why don't we call them as revolt of 1857, or why don't we call them peasant revolt, peasant independence, find, or what is called the war of independence, fighting for independence, their problem is that they're not fighting for independence. They're actually only fighting for their own agenda. And their agenda was actually resolved by the British itself. So they were going to the source of the pain to remove a small pain which was there. So generic rebellion means that it's not peasant, it's not tribal, it's people. So very simply, there's a lack of vision, lack of understanding of colonialism. We can't blame them because the larger picture was not clear, but it was still a major reason why they will never succeed, or these revolts never became a reason why the British left India in that regard. So, if all is perfect, then we'll go into rebellions. Can we do that? Yes, great. So, we have done very simply, two, three very simple concepts. We've discussed the reasons, we discussed the limitations, and now our discussion is going to generally be about the rebellions themselves or rebellions. And here again, the metric is very simple. We need to know the name of the rebellion and we need to know the main agenda of the rebellion. Do not try to learn their years, because it will become too much to manage. Because most of them have happening over multiple years, so you can't pinpoint their basic location in the chronology. So the name and agenda will be enough to answer any question in prelims, wherein they can give you a match the following type question or generally a statement based question. Okay, now the first topic which we discuss is called rebellions. These rebellions are not specific to any class or group. They are basically what are called generic. Generic means that they had a grievance, they had a certain problem, and that problem, if it got solved, then it automatically fizzed out. It automatically fizzed out. So it's a general rebellion. It's a general rebellion, if you want to say. It's a general rebellion, not specific to anything. And in this, the first one which we discuss is called the Sannyasi rebellion. Within just before the Battle of Buxar itself, 2 years before the Battle of Buxar, we already, rather the 1 year before the Battle of Buxar and 2 years before the grant of Diwani, we already had the first moment of rebellion, which is called Sannyasis. Now, Sannyasi, and there is one more which is called Fakir. These are two rebellions which happened, and they were very quick to happen. Now, again, what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to give you the basic idea, then I will discuss the nitty-gritty, and then I'll try to write them down in one place so that you can understand what to do with this information. I'll do it for the generic rebellions, peasant. I hope you will be capable to do it for yourself. Tribal, I've already done for you. Right? Acceptable? This is the basic thing, the way we are going to approach it in that regard. Okay, great. Now, why do the sannyasis and the fakirs, the two major rebellions, why do they have an issue with the British? Now, basically, when people started to become landless, when people started to get impacted by the land revenue policies, a lot of people gave up everything and became sannyasi. Sannyasi, basically, fakir are the same thing. They are nothing but saints. So you would have seen sannyasis, dandis, fakirs in different places. They don't adhere to basic notions of society. They roam around. And the most important feature of a sannyasi and fakir is that they are never sedentary. They are mobile. They are mobile, which is that they move around. So sannyasis will go around in a certain sector, fakirs will go around in a certain sector. Now, the British had a problem with this. The British had a fear of the sannyasis and the fakirs. As it is, the sannyasis, if they are coming from a certain group, they had symbolic arms in that regard. For example, the Trishul. Though it is not a weapon, it is basically a very important marker of Shaivism, of Shiva. So therefore, they don't have assets, so they move around. They are mobile, and they are very simply moving around in a certain area. In a way, yes, sannyasi would be a Hindu word, fakir would be a Muslim word, sure, but there's no very specificities in that regard. The simple point of the matter is, if they are moving, for example, from Allahabad, which is Prayagraj today, to Calcutta, the problem which the British have is that they move with information. So a sannyasi can see what is happening in Allahabad and he can compare it with what is happening in Calcutta. So very simply, they are in a way the only way information can be disseminated at this point of time. Because a fakir or a sannyasi, if he's traveling from Allahabad to Calcutta, people of Allahabad don't know that they are getting exploited like in Calcutta, or the Calcutta one don't know that they are getting exploited in Allahabad. But sannyasis and fakirs are the ones who are disseminating this information. So the British, very straightforward, had a problem with their mobility. Had a problem with their mobility, that they are moving around and we need to stop it. We need to stop it. And mobility, therefore, was something which the British wanted to curb. And as soon as there will be regulations, there will be certain rules, and there will be certain policies which will try to stop their mobility. For example, easiest registration, that you need to register yourself as a sannyasi or to register yourself as a fakir. When they will do that, there will be rebellion. They will rebel, they will burn, they will destroy, and for a very long time, for at least 40-45 years, close to 60 years, the sannyasis from time to time will rebel against the British. So this concept is related to mobility and their concept of moving around. The British are very, very anxious and very, 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 very cautious with regards to certain communities. And this is that one community which they don't want to touch and they don't want to be mobile. So the first, this is what is the basic grievance here? The grievance is basically policy. It is colonial policy which leads to rebellion. So sannyasi or fakir, the basic concept is policies. So you have the growing burden of taxation. People are becoming or are evicted out of land. So a lot of peasantry becomes sannyasi. These people who were evicted joined the sannyasis and fakirs, and they started to now become basically small bands of groups which used to travel around. They raided company factories and treasuries and fought with the British forces when it came to resistance. And there were prolonged period of actions against the sannyasis, and it will take the British quite a long time to actually stop this major rebellion in that regard. Now, there are leaders which you need to know. The ones which I'm going to mark are the ones which are important. So, because Majnun Shah is also there in the Fakir one, here you remember very, very simply Chirag Ali. I'll write it down for you. And closely related to it is is the Fakir uprising. Again, same in between this period. Fakirs are Muslim religious mendicants, and they are not happy with colonial rule, and also the mobility is questioned, and that in turn leads to Majnun Shah, who is considered a sannyasi rebellion person also. He will join the distressed farmers and zamindars of Bengal and fight the British. Now, what to do with this information? This is where my role comes in, that I have to tell you what to do with this information. So, first is sannyasi, second is fakir, can you remember this much? What is written on the screen? You would not like, why would a fakir want to be registered? You remember this much? That very simply, one leader, rebellion name, basic grievance. Remember this much? I'll create a repository here, so don't worry. And we'll try to do a question. 1 to 2 leaders is enough. Don't have to learn all of it. Are we clear? Because you have to do it for yourself later. This is how notes are made. Important for your preparation. Okay, great. Now you have what are called the Pagalpanthis, 1813-33. Here the person who is the leader is Karam Shah and his son Tipu Shah. It was a religious, semi-religious sect, but Tipu Shah will organize them properly against the zamindars and local agents of British office and the British generally. He will be get captured, but he had a very strong following wherein Hindus, Muslims, the Garo and the Hajong tribe of the Assam, of the what we call as the northeastern sector, were part of the Pagalpanthis, and it will be brutally suppressed by the British authority. So basically, here this rebellion is against zamindars and local agents. So we can just add it to our list, which is third Pagalpanthis, Tipu Shah, zamindar based exploitation, and British agents. Sannyasi is a word which is mostly used for Hindu sannyasis, and fakir is used for Muslims. That is the basic difference. As it is, they're exactly the same. So, the Pintu, here you have to be very. This is the only amount of information you need to remember. That is it. Sannyasi, fakir, pagalpanthi, Chirag Ali, Majnun Shah, Tipu Shah. Any issue till this point? You are seeing that there is not a lot here. It's all descriptive again, standard descriptive things which we discussed yesterday. last moment of pain. Thereafter, things will become interesting from tomorrow when I'll be discussing with you the concept of 1857. So just have to consolidate this area via this basic process. A lot of you are very silent today. Either you are in shock of social justice reform movement from yesterday, or you have to be a little bit more feedback mechanism, have to create a little bit of looping wherein I can at least understand that you are following me. Because there are two things I'm doing. I can easily tell you the basic rebellions and I can tell you the leaders. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to give you running notes so that you can also learn as we go on. So it's just that the only last moment of pain, hereafter it is going to be not like this, and as it is quite descriptive in that regard. Okay, now Pagalpanthi is done. Hereafter comes the interesting rebellion called the Malabari rebellion or the Mopla rebellion or the Mapila rebellion. Now this is an interesting rebellion because of its the way it actually manifested itself. So Mopla Muslims are basically the descendants of Arab traders. So Arab traders who had actually come to the Kerala sector started to settle down, and when they started to interact with the population, there's a whole community called the Mopla Muslims who are basically related to the Arab traders, the Central Asian traders. Now they are in a way like landlords in the sense that they hold a lot of land and they have multiple peasants under them. Now, in the southern sector, Moplas are basically big peasantry, under them multiple peasants. But what was the land revenue settlement which was applied in the south? Rayatwari. Now, if if I'm the if I'm the Mopla Muslim who controls, I'm the Mopla landlord, and if I control 50 peasants or tenants, who will the British go and have an arrangement with, the landlord or the peasant? The peasant. And this is the problem, that basically the Moplas who were previously landlords were very quickly reduced to tenants and land, very simply leaseholders, and that in turn will become the reason why they will rebel multiple times between 1835 to 1921. It is the impact of the Rayatwari settlement that is actually going to make them rebel against the British. So Moplas are descendant of Muslim Arab traders. The British system, which is basically the Rayatwari system, will reduce them to the status of tenant and leaseholders, and then there will be overassessment, illegal cesses, and the point is that the pro-landlord attitude of the state, which was there in Bengal, wasn't there in in Kerala or the southern sector. So they will say that we also want the same type of treatment which you gave in permanent settlement. So the Moplas with 22 different outbreaks will happen between 1836 until 1921, and the British will more or less suppress it, but it will again reappear. So the Moplas, very simple. See, in the agrarian structure of this sector, the Moplas are very big peasantry, and they have multiple tenants and peasants under them. So they hold a lot of power. When the Rayatwari system comes, rather than assessing it with the Moplas, they will go for the lower riots. And when they will go for the riots, this in turn is going to become the problem. Why? Because then the Moplas are dispossessed of their land and they become tenants itself. So if you were a landlord and you were expecting pro-landlord behavior from the British and you are made into a tenant, would you be happy with it? Would you be happy with it? Obviously not. So the Moplas are going to rebel multiple times over the same issue. So very simply, Mopla rebellion, no basic leader, the land revenue settlement reduced them to tenants. So we've done 4 till this point. Sannyasi, Fakir, Pagalpanti, Mopla, all having their own set of concepts. So, Tanisha, you have to refresh because I am writing. You can see the cursor but not writing, just refresh once. The simple point is that it's a landlord rebelling because he is or losing its land. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay. Now, thereafter, Kuka, we already discussed this yesterday. The Kuka or the Namdharis sect of Sikhism started with the purification of Sikhism. However, they will start to boycott British products also. The main leader is Ram Singh, who will establish an organization or a rebellion or a revolt to restore the prestige of the Sikh community. And later, Ram Singh will be captured and sent to Rangoon as an exile concept. So Mopla rebellion done by the Moplas, obviously the Moplas. So Kuka we already discussed yesterday, but let's add it here. Kuka rebellion, Ram Singh, humiliation of the Sikhs, also called the Namdhari revolt or rebellion. So you can call it revolt, rebellion. Right now, it doesn't really matter because it's generic. You want to call it revolt, very good. Kuka revolt, whatever you want to call it. At this point of time, we use it interchangeably. What is the difference between peasant, farmer, planter? Peasant and farmer is the same thing, which is people who own their own land. Planter is a person who owns a very big acres of land. He could be a landlord. Landlord, planter is the same thing. And tenant is the one who does not own his own land. So sannyasi, fakir, pagalpanthi, mopla, kuka, revolt, rebellion, whatever you want to call it. Thereafter, the most interesting development which not a lot of people talk about. Can I talk about Vellore? Can I talk about Vellore? Yes? Okay. Now, when I will ask you that which was the first mutiny in India, maybe you will not tell me, but everybody is going to talk about the mutiny of 1857. People tend to say that the first time the Sepoy mutiny happened, it was 1857. And there's a major criticism which is given vis-a-vis the geographical reach of the revolt of 1857, that when we talk about revolt of 1857, we have Kanpur, we have Delhi, we have Jhansi, we have Lucknow, we have Kuwar Singh in Bhagalpur, that whole sector, the Jagdishpur sector. So you have Jagdishpur. What is common to all of them is that they are North India. And a major criticism which is given is that in the revolt of 1857, South India did not respond. But in order to understand Meerut, in order to understand why South India did not give a response, is because 51 years previously, in 1806, they already had gone through the same process in Vellore. So Vellore was a very important cantonment. Cantonment means where the British stationed their army. And the simple point of the matter is that when in Vellore, the army rebelled against certain changes which the British were bringing in. For example, not allowing the caste markers. The simple point is that Vellore mutinied 50 years ago only. Yes, Madhur. Vellore had already rebelled 50 years ago. So when it comes to 1857, they were not able to rebel because the British had already created fear and had already put in the mechanisms that they would never be a part of the mutiny itself. And that is why the first mutiny in India is not 1857, but is the Vellore mutiny. And the Vellore mutiny already did what the revolt of 1857 will do after 50 years. So the simple point is that when we talk about the southern sector, they had already done what North is going to do 50 years later. So the person is John Charnock and William Bentinck, who was actually stationed in Vellore. They will introduce the what is called the European turban and prohibit the wearing of earrings and caste marks for the Sipahis. Against the racial antagonism and the discrimination of the Europeans, the rebels will actually unfurl Tipu Sultan's tiger-striped flag, wherein they will declare his first son, Futeh Haider, as their ruler. But Colonel Gillespie is going to literally kill, burn, and shoot any soldier who had rebelled. So in 1806 itself, the British had created fear in South India. Now tell me one thing, when the revolt of 1857 happens, where do they first go? Where do they first go? Who is their first leader who they become a part of? Or they technically make a part of the rebellion. They go to Delhi and they make Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader. Yes? Now tell me one thing. Isn't the same thing happening in Vellore mutiny? Bahadur Shah Zafar represents the Mughal Empire and Mughal rule, so they went to the Mughal rule. Here, because Vellore comes within the Mysorean sector, so their understanding and their worldview was we should go to the ruler who ruled us before, which is Tipu Sultan. But Tipu Sultan is dead, so Tipu Sultan's son, Futeh Haider. This is not a coincidence, it's a pattern. I'll talk about this concept tomorrow, that there's a problem of worldview here. But the simple point is, why am I discussing Vellore mutiny with you? Because you need to understand one thing, that what 1857 did in 1857 was not something new. There was already something which had happened in 1806 called the Vellore mutiny, but it was never able to become what 1857 was later after 50 years. And simple point is now I'm going to ask you a question. Is the criticism vis-a-vis South Indian participation not in 1857 justified? No, no. Sachin will talk about scale and all, don't worry. No, because they did not have the bandwidth, or what we can say, the space to rebel only. They already had done it, and the British had brutally crushed it. So please understand the importance of the Vellore mutiny in the story, because Vellore mutiny is a very important rebellion which technically created the template for revolt of 1857 to happen. The racial discrimination and change in rules in appearance and clothing, specifically not allowing caste markers. So, sannyasi, fakir, pagalpanthi, mopla, kuka, and Vellore, Chirag Ali, Majnun Shah, Tipu Shah, Ram Singh, and Futeh Haider. Very simply, tomorrow we'll talk about Vellore mutiny again and the revolt of 1807. So you will get more perspective. Don't worry about it, because there is a lot of different things. Caste markers would mean basically anything. For example, in North India, you have the sacred thread, the Geneva. You can say that you don't Upanayana, you don't allow it to everybody has certain markers. Certain communities wear a earring, certain communities wear a cap. That markers were removed under the British Army. There is uniformity, and the uniformity is basically how you remove all caste markers. So Vellore mutiny, and we'll talk about it. Or see, the basic trajectory is the same. One of the reasons was this in Bengal also, but we'll talk about the larger concept tomorrow. Now, the next is Velu Thampi. Velu Thampi was the Diwan of Kingdom of Travancore. And when did Kingdom of Travancore will go into subsidiary alliance? It will create an immense burden on the treasury of Travancore. And once the subsidiary alliance started to take away the area of the Travancorean sector, Velu Thampi is going to rebel. He is going to fight. However, within 1 year, he will be captured, and then simply before he could get captured, he will martyr himself so that he cannot be taken by the British in that regard. So for 1 year, he will resist. He will get surrounded. Before the British could take him or do anything to him, he will martyr himself in that regard. And Velu Thampi gives a very important concept, how subsidiary alliance. If you remember, some of you asked me that wasn't there resistance to subsidiary alliance. Some of you asked me that, sir, why is that people can't rebel against subsidiary alliance? This is the problem within this concept of subsidiary alliance. If you go into subsidiary alliance, you lose your army, and the Diwan of Kingdom of Travancore actually realized this once he saw that they were bankrupting the Travancore state itself. So Velu Thampi is very easy because it's related to subsidiary alliance, so you understand the basic context also. So you have 7 Velu Thampi rebellion. In the name itself, Velu Thampi, and it's about subsidiary alliance of Travancore. Anybody has any issue till this point? We are not doing anything difficult. We're not doing anything extraordinary. We are just covering the early rebellions so that we can reach 1857 tomorrow. Last moment of pain. Thereafter, nothing from tomorrow onwards. That is my assertion. That is my promise, because that is the way it is. This is the only last most descriptive area. Don't have to remember the chronology because they are happening in multiple years. So can't do that. Okay. After Velu Thampi, we have the Paika. Paika rebellion is again related to a small kingdom which the British dominated, and they are called the Gajapati rulers. So basically, Paikas worked for the Gajapati rulers, and the Gajapati rulers used to pay Paikas through the concept of what is called tax free land grant. Means that if I am in service of your state, you will give me a land and you will say whatever revenue comes from that land, you take it, you don't give it to me. Your salary is basically the revenue from the land. So it's called a tax free land grant. Now, as soon as the British enter this sector, they start to ask the Paikas to pay tax. So you have been for generation after generation after generation not paying any tax but giving service to the state. Now the Paikas are asked by the British to pay a tax. And in that regard, Bakshi, Jagbandhu, Vidyadhar, he was a military chief of the kingdom of Khurda in this sector, Gajapati ruler sector. He is going to rebel and say, we don't accept this concept of taxation by the British because the British did not give us this land. So because the British only look at them as landowners and rather not as fighters, the problem was their rent-free land grant in lieu of military service will now be taxed, and they will thereafter rebel. So we already have 7 here. Let's make it here 8. We have the Paika rebellion, Bakshi, Jagbandhu, Vidyadhar. Paikas have rent-free land. British ask for rent and revenue, and they will rebel. Whatever Shruti I am writing in these slides is what you actually have to remember. These are rebellions are generally important for prelims, but mains type questions I've already discussed with you, which is the limitation. Now, there's last 2-3 left. Thereafter, you have Ramosi. Ramosi again is related to the Marathas. So the Ramosis are basically the part of the Maratha army and police. Leader is Chittur Singh, and he will again rebel against very heavy assessment of land revenue and heavy collection methods. And under the banner of Umaji in 1825-26, they will start to rebel against the British once there will be an acute famine and scarcity in Pune. The British will rather than fighting the Ramosis, they will offer them land grants and recruit them into the hill police. Now you understand why I told you that as soon as concessions are given, the main cause is lost. This is what the British did in Ramosi, wherein they realized that there's no point fighting the Ramosis. Rather, let's recruit them only. So the Ramosi uprising tells you uprising, movement, same thing. These are words which are used interchangeably. So you have Ramosi, we'll call it rebellion only. You can call it rebellion only. Chittur Singh against oppressive economic exploitation. Thereafter, this is the only thing where you need to concentrate. There are other smaller ones you do not remember, but I have given you them on a timeline. Chittoor rebellion, you have the Gadkari and the Savantwadi rebellion, then you have the Naik Das rebellion, then you have Tana Bhagat movement, and then you have the Chenchus of the Andhra Pradesh. Again, what you have to remember are basically these 9. Total 9. Then we'll move into peasants. Separate issue altogether, totally different concept. Till this point, I've discussed 9 with you. And I'm going to discuss certain questions so that we can move on and close this area. Please pay attention to what I'm saying. Now I'm consolidating this area. Anybody has any issue till this point? No. Simply, we have gone through certain rebellions which are not specific to peasant, not specific to tribals. They are basically generic rebellions. So you have Sannyasi, Chirag Ali, thereafter Fakir, Majnun Shah, Pagalpanthis, Tipu Shah, Ram Singh, Kuka, Moplas against land revenue, Vellore Mutiny, Futeh Haider, Veluthampi against subsidiary alliance of Travancore, and thereafter we have Paika, Jagbandhu Bidyadhar, and Ramosi Chittoor Singh. Total 9, nothing more, nothing less. Can I consolidate this area by giving you one question and we can then basically move on? Yes? Great. So again, repeating for anybody who has not been listening, Sannyasi, Fakir, Pagarpanthi, Mopla, Kuka, Vellore, Velluthampi, Chirag Ali, Majnun Shah, Tipu Shah, Ram Singh, Futeh Haider, Veluthampi, and thereafter Bandhu Vidyadhar and Chittoor Singh. Okay. Sir, you are writing points. How are you finding? When we want to do for another subjects, how another subject is a separate issue altogether. Here I am telling you, see, look at the pattern. Why am I telling you that we expect a prelims question? Because that is the type of question they're asking. See, as it is, nobody has that time. Even if I want you to say, learn everything about the rebellion, you don't have the time, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the bandwidth only. So my funda is very clear. I never expect a student to do something which I won't do myself, which is that there is no point learning these things. You can simply, I could have simply come and said that you have to learn each and every line I'm saying to you. Makes no sense only. And as it is, we don't have to do a thesis on tribal rebellion or the social justice reform movement. We just have to understand them. So what is the issue? So Pintu, how you get it is basically by understanding the way the questions are asking certain areas. So we know by basically looking at the pattern that this is the only way they can ask you a question. And very simply, don't expect a question like write a short note on the Ramosi. That is not we expect from UPSC. UPSC is not asked those type of questions till this point. But you never know with UPSC. That is why I'm giving you one line about them so that you know what the concept is. Okay, let's do a question and move on. Consider the following. Okay. Vellore mutiny. Velu Thampi becomes very obvious. Then you can have I'm going to push a poll to you, so don't worry about it. Okay, which of the following are correctly matched? Okay, come on. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Perfect. 63% totally correct. So here, which are the two which are correctly matched? Great. 1 and 4. Paika is Jagbandhu Vidyadhar. Kuka is Ram Singh. Vellore Mutiny is Futeh Haider. It should be here. And Ramosi is going to be what? Chittur Singh. So you can answer this type of question. This is the basic type of question which comes from this area. Very simple concept. I'll give you one more set. I'll give you one more type of question so that we can just consolidate everything here. I'll give you a very simple type of question. This is the easiest if you know your facts. If you know your facts. Okay. Anybody has any issue in this type of question? Nothing. Just have to remember the basic names. There are already 9 names. That's it. Okay. Now, the next is this type of question. And come on, give me the answer for this. Correctly matched. Think about it. Think about it. Very good. 44% perfect. Very good. Kuka is not related to Marathas. Kuka is related to Sikhs. So perfect. 44. See, sannyasi is not, there's none of the pair is correctly matched. Sannyasi is not about forest policy, it's about colonial policy of related to mobility. Velu Thampi is not related to doctrine of life, it's related to subsidiary alliance. Thereafter, Kuka rebellion is not related to Marathas, it is related to the Sikhs. And Paika rebellion has nothing to do with subsidiary alliance, it is related to the customary rights of the Gajapati rulers. Now, this question becomes a little bit difficult. For this, you need basic, what we call as revision. Nothing more, nothing less. But you can now get the basic point of what type of questions can come from this area. There can be one question which can just be basically on the names. Other could be on reasons. Right? Any issues? Can I move on to forest policy? Or rather, the peasant area? Great. So there are two variations I've done with you, and I have for you already made this. So you now understand why I've given you these three basic concepts. Three basic concepts are basically reason, leader, name. That are the three basic metrics in which I'm working with, and that is the way they're making the question also. Any mains type of question will be meta question. That how did they not realize the larger concept of colonialism? I'll give you that concept separately. I've already introduced that concept to you. I'll give you a question in the end. Simple point is Ramosi are basically the brutal policies of the British in the Maratha sector. So Marathas is related to Ramosi, not related to Paikas. Yes, everyone, come on. Clear? Okay. Now let's talk about peasant uprising, and one very simple request to you. First, learn their names and everything I've given you in the PPT, because a lot of you will have this small itch. Can I put them in chronological order? Can I put them in chronological order? Can I put them in chronological order? The answer to that question is first learn them. If you have the capacity, then you can put them in chronological order, but that is going to be difficult because multiple years are there. So, basic point of the matter is the three metrics in which I have discussed with you is enough. As it is, you are not going to learn the dates. So, let's be very honest. You even if I give you that information, you will not learn the dates. So, rather learn what you can actually retain. Right. Okay. Now, I'll give you the context for peasant uprising and then we'll take a break. Now, technically, I don't need to give you a context for peasant uprising, but very simply, it is nothing but economic policy. The concept is land revenue settlements. What is their basic issue? Creates landless peasantry. Thereafter, you have forced commercialization, and the peasantry gets caught up into things like indigo, etc. Thereafter, you have deindustrialization. Here, weavers reduced to landless peasantry, and famines. People die because of hunger. So when we talk about the peasant uprising, there are basically four which you need to remember. One is called the Rangpur Rebellion. Rangpur Rebellion. Thereafter, Rangpur. Then it's called Pabna, Deccan riots, and Indigo riots or Indigo rebellion. They are the only four which you have to remember, but we have to discuss them in a little bit of more detail. Because Pabna, Deccan riots, and Indigo rebellion, you can get a mains question. I will discuss that with you. But I think we all are very clear why peasant uprisings were happening, because of the general impact of the economic policy, because of the general impact of economic policy. Can we agree to that? Yes? Okay. So now I don't want to break the chain in between. So I'll do one thing. I'll give you 10 minutes here. Once I'm done with peasant uprising, I'll give you 5 minutes later, so that you get a breather in between peasant and tribal. I know this area is heavy. That is why I'm saying. So let's take a break here till what is the time? 7:32. We'll come back. 7:32. We'll come back. And 10 minutes just break here, and then I'll give you another breather later. Right? So 7:33. I will see you at 7:33. Right? Right now, and then 5 minutes later. See you. Welcome back. Okay. So we now have to discuss peasant. Right. So our discussion, right. Peasant, we already know basically it's related to economic policy. But as I said, four manifestations. So we know it's colonial economic policy. We know it's the ruination of or the destruction of handicrafts due to overcrowding of land and generally the new land revenue settlements and the administrative policy, judicial policy, which was totally geared towards the British itself. So we know that basically it's the economic pillar of the British which will create the context for these rebellions. The first is called the Rangpur Rebellion. Now, the Rangpur Rebellion is very interesting because it gives you this concept of how the British were able to mask their colonialism. See, the Rangpur Rebellion, which started in the Rangpur district of Bengal, it's actually related to one system which I told you was what was Warren Hastings' system called? Land revenue settlements, Warren Hastings. Before permanent, before Rayatwari, before Mahalwari. It was called, yes, it was called the farming out system. But I gave you the name of the one which is used at the low level, which is called the Ijdari or Ijaredari system. Basically, same system itself. Just to refresh your memory, the concept was very simple that the district collector was going to collect the tax. Collector was going to collect the tax, and he was going to give away the right to collect the tax to the highest bidder. Highest bidder. So they divided whole of that area into certain divisions, and those divisions were then auctioned off to the highest bidder. That is the farming out system. And the highest bidder was actually called the Ijdar, or that is why the name Ijdari system. Now the Rangpur rebellion is basically against one of these Ijdars. So the company wanted to squeeze out maximum revenue from the peasants, and the Rangpur district itself, the Rangpur and the Dinaipur district were under this farming out system. And as I told you, the problem is that because the Ijdar has no connection to the place where he's actually taking out revenue from, he is not interested in the welfare of the farmers. And this rebellion actually happens against the Ijdar of Rangpur and Dinaipur, which is Debi Singh. Debi Singh was the Izdar of this sector, and now because of his very brutal policies, famines had become a commonplace and rural indebtedness started to surge quite a lot. Rate of taxation was extremely high because Debi Singh had to pay further to the district collector, and therefore Devi Singh was following extremely harsh measures against the peasant. So there will be a uprising which will start in 1783 when peasants and zamindars will take control of the districts of the smaller, rather the taluks of the Rangpur sector itself, the Pargana of Kirkani, Khizrut and Tepa. And one of the major leaders was Kena Sarkar. Was Kena Sarkar. Now, as a rebellion, however, it did not actually succeed because the British intervened and they removed Debi Singh but gave it to someone else. So why am I saying that it's a very good example of how the British could mask their concept? Try to understand this. Who created Devi Singh? Who created Devi Singh? Who created Devi Singh? The British. So in Rangpur and Dinajpur, Devi Singh was given the power by the English. But the peasant rebelled against whom? Devi Singh or English? Devi Singh. So therefore, the peasant did not understand that by removing Devi Singh, nothing changes. Nothing changes. Because the English will again appoint a person. So here the peasant did not realize that the problem was not the intermediary, but the cause. And therefore, Rangpur rebellion shows us that how there's a limited understanding of colonialism. So out of this discussion, you just have to remember Rangpur, Kena Sarkar, and Debi Singh. That's it. And the main reason being the concept of Ijdari. But this is a very good example of how things were masked in a way. So I think Rangpur should be clear. Kena Sarkar 1, Debi Singh 2, 3 Ijdari system. Any issue? No, this is the easiest out of all three. Not a very big one with regards to that. Okay. Now, the next table you don't need, it's only 4. So you technically don't need the table. Now comes Indigo. Indigo Revolt 1859-60. Now we've had this discussion previously, but I'll just refresh your memory. Why Indigo is going to become such a big issue. We know that indigo is a very, very harsh crop. Indigo, a leafy plant, which is used to create dye for the industries and generally for weaving and the handloom sector, indigo was important. Because as a plant, it is very, very harsh. It takes out the nitrogen quite quickly. And if you are going to grow indigo over a period of time, soil fertility degrades very, very quickly. Very, very quickly, soil fertility starts to degrade. Now, in India, as you remember, there are 2 ways in which indigo was produced. Nij and Rayati. Under Nij, the concept was that a European planter is going to come. On his own land. He is going to produce the indigo and process it to produce indigo dye. However, this was only 5% of all production, because a European planter would not like to have all the burden on him, because here his own land is going to degrade. So people did not prefer this. Rather, 95% of all production was done under Rayati, wherein the peasant takes an advance and against that advance sells the indigo which is produced on part of the land at fixed price to the planter. So the planter is going to only what is called process it. He's not going to produce it. So here the producer is the peasant, and here the producer is the European planter. Now I also explained to you how it could lead to a debt trap. Very simply, Rayati system is the reason for a debt trap, wherein, very simply, just to give you an example, you get 100 rupees, for example, in the year of 1910, 100 rupees advance, and you have to sell to the planter at rupees 10, fixed cost, fixed price. So in order to pay off that 100 rupees, that person would have to produce, or would have to produce at least 10 kgs. Then only that person can pay off that 100 rupees. Now what happens is that the planter will again give 100 rupees in, for example, 1911. But the problem is that again at the same rate, the yield will fall. The yield will fall because now only 9 kgs will be able to produce, because 1 year indigo plantation had happened. So now he'll be only able to give 90 rupees. So 10 rupees on the peasant. Now next year again he will pay 100 rupees. He will say that you pay me. So again rupees 10. So he has to now produce at least 11 kgs. But again the yield is going to be 8 kgs. Yield is going to continuously fall. And the debt trap is going to keep on increasing at a point that he will owe 100 rupees plus 100 rupees over and above that, and he will never be able to pay it off, because every year there will be a declining yield, because he cannot keep the land fallow. He cannot keep the land fallow because the fertility of the soil is going to keep on deteriorating. The indigo is going to take out the nitrogen more and more, and you need to keep the land fallow, or leave it, or add fertilizers which is not there, but you have to leave the land. You don't have to cultivate it for one cycle, then only it will actually regain its fertility. Now in this case, once the peasant went into this rayati system, they tried to resist it also. They tried to resist it also. But the problem was that whenever they tried to resist, the planters used to send what we call as lathials, or what are called thugs, or goons, to beat these peasant up. They used to harass the peasant, coerce the peasant, force the peasant. They did anything and everything to the peasant to be selling a commodity which also had a declining market. Why? Because the Germans will be able to develop what is called a synthetic indigo dye. They did not need the plant itself. They could get the blue color out of a chemical. And that in turn meant that even when the price crashed, still they were producing indigo at a loss and selling it at a loss. And when this point is going to become more and more evident that the peasant cannot come out of this trap, they will in turn what we call as rebel against the planters, and very well captured in a play which was written at this point of time, which is called Neel Darpan. In Neel Darpan, the plight of the planters, of the peasants, is going to come through. Newspapers are going to start to write about the indigo peasants, and this will now become a national issue at one level. However, the British will do what they do best, is that they will intervene and legislate. They will intervene by establishing what is called the Indigo Commission, and the Indigo Commission will say that yes, everything is wrong, the coercive methods are wrong, and it will ask the planters in some areas to leave. But the point of the matter is, who enabled the planters to do this policy in India itself? Who enabled it? The British. But they will act like the Masiha of the peasants. They will act like the Masiha of the peasants, that basically they were there to protect the peasants, but the reason why they are getting exploited is because of the British itself. So let's try to look at the nitty-gritty of the Indigo rebellion. When we talk about the Indigo Revolt 1859-60, indigo is a dye which is extracted out of a plant. At one point of time, it was in very high demand and was grown mainly in Bengal and Bihar sector. Most of the indigo planters are Britishers, forced tenants to grow indigo as per a contract. The tenants were given a token amount as advance and were required to grow indigo on the best land and sell it at a fixed price to them. This is basically the definition of Rayati system. This is the Rayati system itself. And the price which was fixed by the planter was much below to the prevalent market prices. The system took away the freedom of the tenant to grow crops on his own choice, of his own choice, and of his on his own land, and sell the produce to the buyer of his choice. So, coercive methods such as flogging, kidnapping of the tenant, their family members, physical attack, destruction of property were used to compel the cultivator to obey to the dictates of the planters. Flogging basically means torture. And now it was very evident that the peasant was suffering. However, there will be a major revolt which will be triggered in the Govindpur village of the Nadia district of Bengal. There are two very important leaders who will emerge, Digambar Biswas and Vishnu Biswas, who will stop cultivating indigo. The planters will send armed men and the villagers will basically counter these armed men with their own lathis and spears. And similar protests will start to happen all across Bengal generally, and the revolt will start to spread. So the cultivators at times also became violent, clashed with the police. But one of the things which was used by them was the concept of social boycott, wherein anybody who worked in the household of the planter, they all were asked to not go, and nobody was going to help or work in the planter's household as a form of social boycott. That because these Gora people, these white men, cannot survive without the brown servants, they said that let's remove our men, let the village itself boycott the cultivators, and they will obviously not do each and every activity themselves, and that will coerce them to leave the villages itself. Now, the outcome of this whole process is going to be that it was largely successful because the tenants will be coming out of the planters. The Indigo Commission is also going to be established, and most of the planters had to leave by 1860 these areas because of the way the peasants had responded. The more interesting aspect is what contributed to their success was that across all sections, landed agricultural labor, peasant, medium size, all were part of the rebellion. And more than that, the medium sized landlords actually acted like leaders for for the simple what we call as peasant. So for a peasant, very simply, the medium sized landlord acted like a leader. And the commission which was established was now going to assess the policies, and it will give a report which will ban all unlawful and oppressive practices. But what is more interesting is that this movement is going to receive a lot of support in both Indian and British press, which are going to criticize the oppressive system of the planters. And one of the most interesting is, for example, Harish Chandra Mukherjee, widespread publicity of the plight of cultivators. But Deen Bandhu Mitra's Neel Darpan play became one of the most important way of spreading the message of indigo planters, which is that their basic plight and their basic, what we call as torture, their life had become hell literally because of indigo. And even missionaries will play a very important role in pressurizing the government to do something. Now, this story looks like a story. It's a happy story that planters came, the peasants fought, the peasants got something, and they were able to spread the message of oppression. It seems like a very good story. How the peasant was able to remove the planter. But are the planters the real issue? Are the planters the real issue? No, the problem is the British. But simply their understanding has been distorted by this concept that we, the British, are here to help you. We are here to help you. Yes, the planter is the problem. We are not the problem. The planter is the problem. So again, this is called masking of colonialism. Everybody is perceiving colonialism not as a form of British based oppression. No, the planter is different. Our skin looks the same. I help him coerce. I helped him extract as much as what I wanted to. I told him to go to that sector and get indigo. But no, I am not the problem. He is the problem. So basically, it's the equivalent of beating up the bank agent and not doing anything to the bank. Because the problem here is not the agent, it's the bank, which is the British is the problem, not the planter. So when we talk about indigo revolt, the issue stems from, now I'm consolidating and then we'll move forward. The issue stems from what? The issue stems from the Rayati system of indigo. Thereafter, the issue is planter and planter based coercion, force, and very simply, the flogging and the goons, and very simply, you have the Biswas brothers who are going to be the leaders. You have Digambar and Vishnu Biswas. And Vishnu Biswas. And the basic concept is Indigo Commission, planters leave. Clear, everybody? Indigo is the easiest because we've already been introduced to this concept. So it should not be a problem generally for understanding. Now comes Pabna. Pabna again is in Bengal. It's a district in Bengal, Eastern Bengal. And here leaders are Ishwar Chandra Roy, Shambhupal and Khudi Mullah. And this is a very interesting set. Here, it's not the planter, it's not the British, but here it's the landlord. It's the landlord. Very simply, the issue is not the Britisher, but all of the anger was directed towards the landlord. But what is the irony here is, when it came to getting help from the British, look at the line which is written after against landlords. It says, protesters pledged loyalty to the crown and called themselves the subjects of the queen. They said that we are the peasantry of India. We are getting exploited by the landlord and their high demands. So you, the British, the mighty British, help us, because we are the subjects of your queen. So rather than understanding that the problem is not the landlord, and the landlord has been empowered by the British itself, they are not going anywhere. They are rather saying to the British that we believe in your benevolence. We believe in the fact that you are the mighty British who are here for good. And we, the peasantry of India, are very, very downtrodden and have need some help. Help us, O Queen. This is called the myopic, limited vision of the peasant. You can't blame the peasant because our middle class intelligentsia, even after being literate, were the same. But the point is, you see how beautifully the British were able to mask their colonialism. A lot of students ask, and generally, have you ever imagined that how can a handful of Britishers rule India for 200 years? This is how. They ruled us via this concept that we were never able to understand what was actually happening. What was actually happening? The simple point of the matter is that for us, the problem was not the British, but were the agents of the British. We were always trying to go after the intermediary, and this is where the peasant consciousness was very limited. And we'll talk about one man who's going to change it, because one man will change how the peasant perceived the British, and that person is that person is Gandhi. That person is Gandhi, not Dadabhai Naoroji. That person is actually Gandhi. Gandhi will change everything, because Gandhi will change and integrate the peasantry of India into the national movement. We will discuss that. But I hope you are getting the point of the discussion, that Pabna now is on the other spectrum, from planter to now the concept of a landlord. Again, the peasantry does not understand what is actually happening, and pledging loyalty to the queen is literally going to the oppressor to say that help me because you are oppressing me. So this is the point which you need to understand. Indigo is a planter based, Pabna is based on landlord based, what we call as exploitation. We already know the leaders here. Now, what were the demands of the peasant generally? Cessation of zamindari excesses, meaning the end of the zamindari excesses. Protesters did not demand structural changes. They just wanted the end of zamindari system, which is permanent settlement. Thereafter, methods which are employed: litigation, mobilization of peasantry, funds, refusal to pay rent, very rarely violence. Will start in the Yusufzai Pargana of Pabna itself, and thereafter it will start to get organized in other districts and other areas of Pabna. However, here again the outcome is going to be the benevolent British is going to pass the Bengal Tenancy Act of 1885, which gave protection to the peasants. And again, the revolt was a success because the British wanted it to be a success. And you see the irony of the story, that here the mediator between the zamindar and the peasant is actually the British. But who destroyed this relationship? The British itself. This is here, this is where we lost the plot. So Bengal Tenancy Act 1885 was just a tenancy law which was passed. But the British acted the way that we are here to help. No, you're zamindar. The Britishers were always good in pitting an Indian against an Indian. That is what is actually happening here also. That an Indian is fighting an Indian, and the Britisher is just looking at laughing that how can we be so myopic in our approach that we actually never understood what was happening. This is literally problematic. And again, I will not blame the peasantry because they don't have access to education, because our own educated elites were like that, because they believed that something was good is going to happen. But the basic point is, when we talk about Pabna, intellectuals from Bengal are going to support this movement. You have Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, S.N. Banerjee, A.M. Bose, R.C. Dutt, Dwarkanath Ganguly, all will help in the peasant and support the tenancy bill itself. One of the more interesting features about this whole concept was that there was Hindu-Muslim unity, though zamindars were Hindu and tenants were Muslim. However, the violence was never religious, were actually based on understanding of what we call as class-based clash and not religious clash. Carrot and stick and I will discuss later, not right now. For that, you need to understand Montague, Chelmsford, and Rowlatt Act and all. Now, what have we done till this point? We've discussed indigo. Indigo is planter. We discussed Rangpur. Rangpur is the Ijdari system. Is the Ijdari system. Thereafter, you have Pabna, which is the landlord. The outcome here is Indigo Commission. Outcome here is removal of Debi Singh. And here it is Bengal Tenancy Act 1885. Any issue till this point? Anybody? Come on. Last major discussion like this. Thereafter, it's easy. Okay. Now comes the Deccan riots. Now, let's talk about Deccan. Now, the Deccan riots are based on British officials based exploitation. So here again, the major personality or the agent which they will go against first is the British official, but the main is actually going to be the money lender. The Deccan riots again gives us a new taste because it was directed towards the money lender. Now let's talk about how it is the money lender who gets caught up. Now I'm going to make a graph in front of you. Don't have to learn the graph, just to show you something. So this graph represents the world supply of cotton. It represents the world supply of cotton. So this is the cotton supply or export, and this is the year. So between 1800, 1820, 1860, 1865, 1870, 1880. The biggest exporter of cotton in the world is actually America. So the highest tonnage, for example, 100 million tons, for example, the Americans had a very big market share vis-a-vis their export of cotton. One of the best cotton in the world, long staple cotton used for the industrial revolution quite a lot. And when we talk about Indian cotton may be at, for example, 1 million ton. And Indian cotton was also more or less constant, but the purpose was quite different. The purpose was quite different. Indian cotton, more or less short, stable cotton, not to be used in the British Industrial Revolution, but to be exported to other countries. But now in 1860, something happens. In 1860, the Americans fight amongst themselves in what is called the American Civil War, which happens between 1860 to 65. It's called the Civil War. The northern states of America fight with the southern states of America over the issue of slavery. So the northern states technically did not need slaves because, and I'm giving you a basic overview, listen to me. The northern states generally did not need the slaves because slaves are unskilled labor and northern states have industries. While southern states are agricultural, so they need the slaves for cotton cultivation. Now Abraham Lincoln is going to win the 1860 elections of the president in America. And once he will win the election of president in 1860, he will say that let us do one thing. Slavery is a bad institution, let us ban it. As soon as the Americans will go for banning of slavery, the southern states, also called the Confederate States, you would have heard of this word Confederate States, Confederate flag, Confederate States. The Confederate States will say that we want to come out of America. America is basically called the Coming Together Federation. What are we? We are a holding together federation. The center holds the states very strongly, and we have a unitary bias wherein the center is strong. On the other hand, the state in America are much stronger because they have two constitutions. There's one called the Central Constitution, the main federal constitution, and there's every state has its own constitution. And within that constitution itself, they have the right to secede. Secede is to leave the union if they don't want to stay. So 8 states from southern parts of America are going to say that we want to leave, and later that number is going to become 13 to 14. Now northern states are going to say, where are you going? Southern states are saying that we will create a new America where slavery is going to flourish. And this issue, North and South will fight. North will fight with the South to not allow them to leave the American Union. And that is why all southern states in America are useless. Useless, dumb, have no idea, zero. Vis-a-vis, for example, you have Texas, again, nothing, just these southern states of America, even till today, yes, the dumbest of all of them. So you have Florida, you have Texas, you have, for example, Virginia, you have these very, not New Mexico, but New Mexico. California is not a southern state, it's a western coast state. The Americans generally are dumb. When I'll teach you world history, I'll tell you that Americans are not very smart people. Somehow, right time, right place in that regard. And they technically don't even deserve where they are today. Dumbest of all of them. Dumb. Zero. Nothing at all. And to nowadays, the most conservative also. Women can't get abortion. America is in a very difficult state at this point of time. And if you really need to understand it, is nothing but Trump embodies real America. And he can't make one sentence properly. So that's the problem. I'm not talking about South America. I'm talking about southern states of America. We're not talking about Latin America. We're not talking about Brazil and all. Southern states of America. So very simply, the Americans have the technology, but they never have, as a civilization or as a people, more or less useless. More or less useless. So I have no respect for the Americans generally, and you will also not have it once you will do world history with me. The simple point of the matter is the French are also the same, British even worse. But the simple point is Americans are going to fight. Now for 5 years, America is going to fight. If Americans are going to fight, what happens is that their demand is going to crash. Their demand, or we call as export, is going to crash. And at this point of time, this crash is where the Indian production is going to go up. Is going to go up because the deficit was there, and it is in this phase of 1860 to 65 that cotton prices are going to go extremely high. Cotton prices will go extremely high. Civil war because of slavery issue being fought. Simple point of the matter is that the cotton prices are going to go high and become extremely high because American supply is not there. And if cotton supply is going to get extremely high, as a person whose price of cotton has increased, as a peasant, would I like to grow cotton? Yes or no? If I was producing, for example, some random crop and price of cotton becomes 10 times, so I would like to grow cotton. Now the problem is that you can make profit in one cycle, two cycle, but as soon as the Americans are done fighting, their supply again regains very quickly. So once that is going to happen, it's called the crash of the Indian cotton market. So what is going to happen is, in this period, cotton prices are going to go extremely low and the whole market will crash in India. The cotton market is going to crash in India. Now, if I had been producing cotton, if I had been producing cotton and now I have to pay rent, and the same 1 kg of cotton which was going for 100 rupees is going for 5 rupees, how will I get the money to pay my rent? How will I get it? Or from where I am going to get it? I am going to get it from money lenders. Herein lies the concept of money lenders. Money lenders paid, or rather, money lenders played a very important role in giving the peasants a lot of credit at this point of time. But if the cotton prices are going to be like this throughout, then the money lender started to gather debt on the peasant, or rather the peasant started to gather more and more debt, and therefore money lenders will start to confiscate the land of the peasants when they will not be able to pay out, and it now becomes a generational debt trap, major debt trap for the peasant. The peasant responded to the American Civil War. However, after the American Civil War, the peasant has to pay the ultimate price because they go under, and now they are caught up in the debt crisis of the cotton market in India. So now you understand the basic premise. I had to go through this basic process because I hope you understand why did the cotton market in India crash. There's a boom and then there's a bust, and that bust is going to create problems for the Indian peasantry generally. So the epicenter of the Deccan peasant movement, or the Deccan riots itself, is the period of 1875. Slowdown is going to happen later, slowly will die out generally. The causes is that there's an increase in the rent paid by tenants to the landlords, and the drop in cotton prices after the end of the American Civil War. Cotton fetched high prices during the war, which led to many peasants to cultivate cotton. But thereafter, the price went extremely low, and therefore, why didn't they improve the quality of cotton? Archita, you would need to introduce long staple cotton. It needs more water, and generally, it's easier to grow short staple cotton. The Indian conditions are better for that also. There will be a bad harvest in 1875. increase in revenue by 50% by the British. Now the moneylenders will start to take exorbitant, very, very high interest rates, mostly Marwaris, and the movement will mostly be directed against these moneylenders who had now created a debt trap for the present. Debt trap for the present. And simply, very simply, in 1875, rioting will broke out in 6 taluks of Pune and Ahmedabad. Debt bonds were seized. This basically these papers which used to say that you are indebted to the moneylenders, they will take it and destroy it, burn it. Social boycott of moneylenders will be there. Small cultivators will refuse to pay rent to the government itself. And again, social reformers will play an important role. MG Ranade and his Pune Sarvajanik Sabha, I will discuss Pune Sarvajanik Sabha on Thursday with you, which is they will be basically helping the peasant struggle against the moneylender. And the outcome again is going to be the benevolent British coming in with the Deccan Agriculturalist Relief Act, which will allow the peasants legal remedies against the unreasonable demands. Unreasonable demands. And this is basically your peasant movements. Can I consolidate this area and we can move on to tribal movements? This is the easiest of all of set. I hope that you found it easy also. It's not difficult. It's basically linked to the larger processes of economic history of India. So as I said, we have done very simply. I'll consolidate it through a basic table and we can do it. Okay. Rangpur, Pabana, Indigo, Deccan. This is against Debi Singh, Ijdari system. Pabana is against landlords. This is against planters. This is against money lenders. Here, Debi Singh removed. Here, you have the Bengal Tenancy Act 1885. Here you have the Indigo Commission, and here you have the Deccan Agriculturalists Relief Act. Deccan Agriculturalists Relief Act. Thereafter, basic concept is over exploitation by Ijdar Pabana is the high rent demand by the landlords. Indigo is the Rayati system, and this is the crash after American Civil War plus crop failure plus debt trap. Any issue to anyone generally? No? Okay. Now I'll give you a mains type question from this area and then we'll talk about tribal. The peasant, not movements, the peasant rebellions and revolt in the Indian subcontinent were linked to local issues but also represented a myopic vision of colonialism. Comment. Can you answer this type of question? You can. Peasant rebellions and revolts in Indian subcontinent were linked to local issues but also represented a myopic vision of colonialism. So you have to talk about the reasons, but you also have to talk about how they are not understanding the root cause. So if you can always write it and send it to islive@byju's.com. So you want a 5-minute break before I start tribal? These type of questions come in the examination. Why not? How to write an intro for this type of question? You write it. What is going to be the introduction of this question? 250 words. See, this type of question, you very simply write the context, which is that since the British advent of the British in India, they had been economically exploiting India via their land revenue policy for forced commercialization, deindustrialization, and drain of wealth. And therefore, it is during the mid 19th century, late 19th century, that the peasants rebelled against the colonial exploitation. However, they were not able to understand the larger picture of colonialism. So I've just given you the basic context. That's it. So you just have to write the context, right? You're getting my point. Okay. So I'll give you a 5-minute break. It is 8:27. So we'll be back at 8:32. Rather, let's make it round figure 35. 8:35. Then we start tribal. I want you to be fresh. So tribal at 8:35. Right? Okay. Okay, welcome back. Right. Okay. Ready? Last 1 hour tribal movement. Okay, perfect. Let's talk about tribal movements. And here the reasons are a little bit more diverse. So the Chota Nagpur Plateau, the Western Ghats, the Eastern Ghats, major parts of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, from that the Telangana, Andhra Pradesh region, going up till northern Karnataka, there is a whole belt of tribes or tribal India in that regard. They represent a culture which still is quite important for our culture and generally for our heritage. But the tribals revolting is very interesting because there are 3 4 policies which come together to force them to rebel. The first is very simply the concept of forest policy. So the British followed a very interesting policy vis-a-vis forests are resources for everyone. Forest produce is also resources for everyone. However, they had a very specific policy to make forests inaccessible to tribes, and also designate certain forests as reserved forests. So you would, if you've seen basically the movie Kantara, that is the basic plot. The concept of reserved forests. Certain forests as reserved forests. Now, what this basically means is that a lot of these tribes are not just dependent on the basic concept of forest, but they are also living off the forest produce. Acceptable, right? They are also living off the forest produce. They are also basically in a way dependent on the forest for their livelihood. So this basic point is that there was an area which the tribals used to use for their forest produce, for their basic understanding. So there are certain forests which they are using for their basic understanding. But now the British come through and they say that this forest is designated as a reserved forest and you cannot enter without the permission of the British. So the concept of permission, the concept of regulation, and the concept of what we call as rules for forest access become the first major reason for the tribes to rebel. Now, the British also did a very dangerous thing which we technically pay for today, which is that they also changed the forest profile of India. Forest profile of India. What do you mean by that? That basically there was a major deforestation of forests in the Uttarakhand sector, in the Himachal Pradesh sector, in parts of the Chota Nagpur plateau. But specifically in Himachal Pradesh and in Uttarakhand, they deforested these land or these forests, and they introduced a very dangerous type of species of tree, which basically is not suited for the tropical conditions of India and has now become a major issue vis-a-vis forest fires. The forest fires in Uttarakhand and in the Himachal Pradesh sector is because the British removed the diversity of forest, or diversity, if you want to say genetic diversity of forest, whereas there are multiple forest types which were there, or tree types which were there. They homogenized it and they added one type of tree which is very, very dangerous, or very dangerous in a tropical environment, and that is called the chir pine. It's called the chir pine tree or forest. What happens is that these pine forests, the pine falls on the ground, and because of the heat of India, what happens is that there's a very major affinity for it to catch fire. There is very major affinity to catch fire. So from, for example, deodar and oak, they were now making it into chir pine. Chir pine is a very dangerous forest, though not in temperate zones, but in torrid zones, in the zones where there is a lot of heat. This is a very dangerous forest itself, and this is a price we pay today, that most of these forests in India are extremely prone to forest fires started by humans, or generally because of the heated conditions. So the first and foremost reason for why the British basically induced the tribes to rebel is their forest policy. So first is inaccessibility, and second is deforestation. Any issue in this first point? Forest policy should not be an issue. Okay. Now comes the other two. The other two is economic policy and the intervention or introduction of landed intermediaries, specifically landlords and money lenders. See, basically, what the British do is twofold thing, wherein they start to ask for taxes from the tribes, and more than that, in certain areas, British introduce agriculture and wanted to exploit the tribes. And therein again, these intermediaries basically started to exit the main agrarian sector and started to enter into the forested area. So forests were cut down, agricultural land was created, and therein the tribes were made into tenants or agricultural labor. So if I bring all these three reasons together, what it actually means is that first, there were new elements, what they used to call foreign elements in their own forested land. Second, the British through their economic policy wanted to tax the tribes for what was free. And third is basically the forest policy followed by the British was to restrict the access of the Britishers, or restrict the access of the tribes into these forests itself. So it's not that money lenders entered into the forest. Forests were cleared, and therefore they were made into agricultural lands. So large parts of Chota Nagpur Plateau, large parts of Western Ghats were not cultivated. but rather they cleared that forest, created the agricultural setup, and now they were getting exploited by the standard landlords and money lenders. So in a way, the issue is peasant plus forest policy. Are we clear with regards to this? Because then we have to discuss the major tribal revolts. Yes? Okay. Yes, forest to farm conversion, which is called agrarian expansion. Now, what are the reasons? I have everything written down, don't worry. Introduction of land revenue settlements in tribal areas. Increased demand for wood in the 19th century, which means deforestation. Through different forest policies like the Indian Forest Act of 1878, thousands of acres was declared as forest, reserve forest. Oppression and extortion by policemen and government agents in tribal areas. Influx of moneylenders and traders into tribal areas, and even entry of Christian missionaries who entered to convert most of these tribals who were not basically, they had their own concept of religion. So the missionaries also entered and started to convert. Now, what I've done is I have very simply divided firstly mainland and northeast, and I made this whole table set for you. So you have the Paharia rebellion, the Chuar rebellion, then you have the Kol, Karwar, Santhal, Naikada, the Ho, Munda, Kondh, the Konda Dora, thereafter Bhil, and thereafter Koya, Juang, Buyan, Tana Bhagat, Bastar, Rampa. This is what I've made for mainland. And thereafter, you have one for northeast, specifically frontier area. Ahom, Khasi, Singpos, Kuki, Tripura, the Zelingrong, Naga, the Hirakata cult, and therefore I have what I've done is very simply for you, put in everything already in a table. But out of this, we have to learn certain specific ones. So the ones which I am, obviously they are quite a lot. The basic point of the matter is here what 11, 12, 13 here, 15, 15, 16 here. Simple is the ones I am discussing, Kol, Santhal, Munda are the ones which we need to actually pay attention to. Other than that, rather than giving you their basic details, I've added the date, area, and the reason. Don't have to learn it right now. Rather, concentrate on the ones which I'm discussing with you, specifically starting with coal. So, my job was to give you a repository. I have given you the repository in one place. Now, you just have to simply learn it in a systematic manner over the next 1 year. More than that, the ones I am concentrating on are the ones which you have to concentrate generally on, which are Kol, Santhal, Munda, which are the three most important. Are you getting the point? I could have easily given you the text and given you or asked you to make the PPT or to make the table itself. Rather, I made the table for you already. So I hope that you can use it for your preparation in an effective way. Here, it would have taken you at least 6 to 7 hours to come up with these tables. I've already taken away from that. Right? 6 to 7 hours I've saved for you. So are we clear with regards to what is the purpose? Because the ones which I'm going to discuss with you are much more important, and we have to discuss the limitations and the characteristics out of which mains questions can come through. Yes? Okay. So lot, not a lot. The point is my job was to give you each and every one which was important. Okay. Now, coal, 1831, Chota Nagpur Plateau, led by Budo Bhagat, rebelled against the British who were pushing in moneylenders and landlords into this area. Thousands of coals will perish when the British will basically show repression. And this is going to be a very standard feature. That unlike the peasants, the tribals are not going to negotiate with the British. The tribals will rebel against the British. But the problem is that the British will show so much repression that the uprising will get more or less squashed by the British. So why land on money lenders be pushed so as to extract money out of the coals? So please understand this. The tribe is coal coming from the Chota Nagpur plateau. Budo Bhagat, money lenders being pushed by Britishers and landlords to get and extract more money. Right? Any issue in coal? I'm keeping it simple. You just need to know the ones which I'm discussing here in that regard. Okay. Yes, coal is the tribal group. Then comes the Santhal, one of the most celebrated, along with the what we call as Munda uprising. 1855, just 2 years before the revolt of 1857, two brothers, Sidhu and Kanhu Murmu, are going to mobilize 10,000 Santhals to declare a rebellion against the British colonists. The uprising was basically against the economic exploitation, against moneylenders, and the British authorities were protecting the moneylenders who had entered the zone of the Santhal people. The area was basically the Bhagalpur and Rajmahal hill complex. Soon after the declarations, the Santhals will take up arms, and the British again will be taken by surprise initially. However, the initial surprise, wherein they will not be able to respond well to the Santhal uprising, will be followed by the British calling up the military to actually control the Santhals. So initially, a small contingent was sent to suppress the rebellion. They will not be able to succeed. So the revolt, with the spirit of the revolt, will be exaggerated. When law and order situation will become extremely bad, the British will then finally take the steps to send troops into this sector, using the local zamindars and the Nawab to help quench the rebellion. And whilst the primitive weapons of Santhal had worked in the first go, the second one, in which they will take with them cannons and musket, there was no chance that the Santhals will be able to win at this point of time. And this revolt will be brutally crushed in 1856, and the two celebrated leaders will be martyred by the British in that regard. This Chota Nagpur Plateau means Odisha, parts of Jharkhand, parts of Bihar, that whole area. Right? So Santhal uprising, we have Sidhu and Kanu. Thereafter, Bhagalpur Rajmahal complex, economic reason, and British using force. Any issue here? We'll talk about the tribal vision. We'll talk about the basic concept. Musket is a gun. We'll talk about the characteristics. We'll talk about the characteristics. Don't worry about that, because I need to have a discussion with you generally. Are we clear with regards to coal and Santhal? Same basic issues are there as we saw in the peasant and as we saw previously. Okay. The reason to give you that 7-minute break was not to create discontinuity, because a lot of you are again trying to come to the same terms of with the same things itself. Okay. Thereafter, one of the most celebrated leaders and one of the most celebrated rebellion, the Munda rebellion, the Munda uprising, or the Ulugulan uprising. One of these most celebrated leaders, the Munda leader, Bhagwan Birsa Munda. The main rebellion took place in the regions south of Ranchi in 1899-1900. Aimed, now this is a major difference, to drive away the British and establish Munda Raj or Munda rule. And this is the major difference. Why is Birsa Munda considered so important? Because he did not attack the intermediary, or as I will say, he did not attack the agent, but rather went after the British. He said that enough is enough. We need to remove the British only. So he will strongly protest against non-tribals coming and taking tribal land. He disliked the moneylenders and the zamindars who were ill-treating the Mundas. He advertised the Munda farmers not to pay rent to the zamindars. He was against the concept of zamindari tenure exploitation by moneylenders and forest contractors. And therefore, the revolt will start in the Chota Nagpur plateau. They attack the British officers, the missionaries, and the police stations in that regard. However, the British will later capture Bhagwan Birsa Munda and suppress the rebellion generally. This is the other name of Birsa Munda. Thereafter, you have the Chwar uprising. This is again the area of again the Chota Nagpur plateau. And the Chwar aboriginal tribes again were not very happy with the economic deprivation which the British were pushing on them. Leader is Durjan Singh, a displaced zamindar who went into the sector to take the help of the Chwars. And some historians call it the freedom struggle of the Jangal Mahal, and that is why it was recently rather quoted under the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, the concept of freedom struggle of Jangal Mahal. Jangal Mahal means the forest kingdom, and Durjan Singh was mentioned in that. That is why I mentioned it here. Thereafter, we'll talk about frontier regions later. Let's consolidate this area. What have we done? We've done Kol, Chuar, Santhal, and Munda. Is there any issue in any of them, or their basic point is the same? British exploitation, money lenders, zamindars. Other than that, you have the Kol, you have the Santhals, you have the Munda, and you have the Chuar. Anybody has basic fundamental issue with the concept? Because I need to discuss with you the characteristics and the limitations of these tribal movements, because a mains question can come out of there. For tribal rebellions, do we have to make a table? Then what was the point of showing you this? This was the whole, they already are in a table. I put in them the table. Chwar is already here. You have Kol here. You have Santhal here. You have all of them in this. Munda here. So I've given you all of them. I'm just trying to explain this concept to you, that what is the purpose of concentrating on them. We are concentrating on them because they are very important rebellions. And what was extremely important about them was that they did not just go after the agent, but also after the British. Are we clear? None of them succeeded. Obviously, we'll talk about that. Munda is the name. Okay. Now, frontier regions, you have the Ahom revolt, which is based on how the British initially said that if you help us in the Burma war, we will keep you independent, but they will technically not keep their side of the bargain. So the Ahoms will revolt in 1828-33. Khasis again linked to the concept of occupation of the hilly region by the British. Then you have the Singpos, again British rule into the tribal sector. Cookies, again the way the cookies were taken as labor in the First World War. Thereafter you have the revolt in Tripura against high taxation. This was against the concept of Kuki violence, and the British did not protect the Zhelangrong tribe against the Kukis itself. You have the Naga movement. You have the Heraka cult itself, out of which we'll talk about Rani Ganliu. We'll talk about her when we'll talk about the civil disobedience movement. But basically, these are the revolts which were happening in the northeast. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of data. But what comes in the examination out of this area is characteristics and limitations. So can I concentrate on the characteristics and limitations, and basically the characteristics being the limiting factor also? Don't have to get flustered. If you can learn one each day, enough, no issues at all. Concentrate on Santhal, Kol, Munda, and Chua. Are we all on the same page? Because now the discussion matters. Next 15-20 minutes important for you to write a mains answer. Yes, we are all on the same page. No issues at all generally. Great. Perfect. Come on. Now, let's talk about their characteristics and limitations. Yes, Ilma, you can do that. Now, what do I mean by that? See, the characteristics of this rebellion are also, or these rebellions is also their limiting factor. You will see. See, the first is that the mobilization of the tribes is based on tribal identity. Now, though it is a characteristic, it is also a limitation. Why? Because though Mundas will fight, or rather the Santhals will fight under the banner of the Santhal, they will never come together with the other tribe. So the problem is that the unity of tribal movement is not possible. Because as much as they can come together under a banner, they will not interact with the next tribe. So, for example, the Santhals will not join their hands with the Mundas because their identity is different. They will be able to mobilize themselves, but externally they cannot come together. So one of the most interesting features is also one of the biggest weakness of the tribal revolts is that they will always be isolated and local or regional issues or impact. They will never be able to become bigger than what they were because they will not be able to add the larger tribes into their main rebellion itself. So in a way, the problem persists because of the main characteristic of their rebellion itself. So it's a characteristic, but it also is a very major limitation in how they actually are fighting with the British. Second is that they have extremely primitive weapons. So as much as they can rebel. The problem is that the modern weaponry of the British, if the British bring in their army or bring in their forces, there is no chance that the tribals would survive that much level of firepower and that much level of weapon based violence. Basically, the Santhals were able to destabilize the British for some time. The Mundas were also able to do it. But the problem was that once the British entered with their cannons and their muskets and their guns, there was no chance that the primitive weapons of the tribals would have actually stood up against these long range weapons itself. So another important characteristic becomes a limitation factor vis-a-vis the tribals generally. Thereafter, there's also one more issue, which is the long-term vision. Why tribal people cannot come together? Because if I'm mobilizing you under a certain banner, I say that we all are part of a certain tribe. Will a different tribe then come with you? Tell me. If your mobilization is on local regional issues, your mobilization is based on a certain identity that we all are dash. So will a certain other tribe want to join that? No, because they have their own mobilization. So it's not that they are coming together as a tribes of India, they're coming together as their own tribe itself. But the other issue with regards to their basic plan was the long term vision. What was the vision? Yes, you have rebelled. This is going to be a problem in 1857 also. Yes, you have rebelled. Now what? Now what? You have rebelled against the British. You have removed every money lender and zamindar. Now what? What is the end game here? And this is the basic problem. It was easier to rebel than to actually sustain the rebellion. So now again this issue remains that what do they do with that freedom? So when we talk about the tribal rebellions in India, the problem is that they are not able to create a coherent long-term picture also. So they are mobilizing on tribal identity, local and regional issues. They are using primitive weapons, but also the long-term vision is distorted. So in a way, when we talk about the characteristics, tribal identity, ethnic ties were used as a binding force in the movement. I've given it to you in this way because you can just write it in the examination and your mains answer is done. Then the identities united them fighting against the outsider, but not all outsiders were enemy. That is also true. The poor who supported the tribal economy were left more or less alone. The anger was against moneylenders, traders who were recognized as agents of the colonial rule. Further, Mahima he had, but the problem was that then the firepower was too much. It was only Bhagwan Birsa Munda who actually had a long-term vision about Munda Raj. But the problem was that again the British were too powerful at that point of time. So the common cause for these movements was the law imposed by the colonial government, which destroyed the traditional social economic framework of the tribal society. Another important feature of all these movements are messiah-like figures, wherein the leaders are larger than life. They are considered as the person who can change everything and anything. And the problem is that when you have only one leader and there's no larger vision, if the British are able to capture that leader, then the movement automatically fizzes out. So, for example, Bhagwan Birsa Munda in that regard represents that messiah-like figure. Most of those leaders claim to derive their power and authority from God. So they are also using a certain type of understanding. There were also certain concepts which were based on the leaders having magical powers. For example, it was claimed that Bhagwan Birsa Munda did not get affected by bullets. Filled with hope and confidence, the tribal masses followed these leaders till the very end. But the problem is they are localized, isolated, and lack the feeling of nationalism. And because they were frequently violent and very, in a sense, based on what we call as warfare, the British were able to justify their violence by saying that you were using the violence first. So the problem is that as much as they are spontaneous in nature, as much as they are broad based, the organizational structure was also weak. They were more or less rebelling against the old agrarian order, which is the zamindars and the moneylenders. But again, there is no basic planning in what they want to do once they are able to overthrow that. So they often attacked the outsiders, looted their property, took away, or generally took what was theirs. But the warfare between the British and the tribal rebels were mostly unequal. The British were using modern weapons vis-a-vis the tribals using primitive weapons. So before we talk about the weakness generally, every characteristic is a weakness. Wherein, let me try to again contextualize it. Because you are, they can actually be a mains question directly on characteristic and on weakness. Because they are mobilizing at local level based on local issues and tribal identity, there cannot be no connection. They have Messiah-like figures, very, very important for mobilization, but again, they are not ready to cooperate with each other, and generally, the British can target that leader. Further, they are based on attacking the agrarian order or generally the new outsiders which have come in, the zamindars and the moneylenders. And the biggest problem is that either they are spontaneous or they are not thinking of the long-term mission itself. So, when I talk about the weaknesses of the tribal uprising, it is actually just the extension of everything which you see vis-a-vis characteristic. They are localized, they are isolated revolts with no real connection with the main larger freedom struggle in that regard. Therefore, they were not able to sustain themselves for a very long time. Further, most of the movements arise or arose out of local grievances. Therefore, there was no, again, all India level impact or support in that regard. The movements had a conservative or traditional outlook. Sometimes they did not even have a long-term vision, what to do with it. And more than that, some of these revolts were also quenched as soon as the British agreed to agree with certain specific demands. The movements were not revolutionary in their idea of what they wanted, which is an India concept, no concept of nationalism. Movement did not provide an alternative solution, and further, the war strategies were primitive vis-a-vis the British Army being very, very powerful. Now we'll talk about remedial measures. First, I need to consolidate both these things together. Now I'll give you a question and I'll tell you how to answer it. I hope you're understanding the characteristic and the weakness together. It's not difficult. It's just simply the way you see the characteristics. They also reflect certain weaknesses. So you have very simply, for example, a question like this. The basic features of the tribal revolts in India also reflect the weaknesses and limitations of tribal movements in India. 150 words. Elucidate. That the basic features reflect also the weakness and limitations of tribal movement in India. Very simply, you have to work in the standard 3 basic pillars. You have localized nature, primitive technology, tribal mobilization, and lack of long-term vision. Elucidate means to elaborate. You have to give me examples. Can you write this type of answer? Yes? Okay. Now, one area where you don't have to bother, but you just have to enjoy. So, in a way, what we had to discuss today is over. And we will now pivot towards 1857 tomorrow. But I'm going to do a very important thing with you, which is to give you a basic vision of what is going to follow now. But what I want to do is that I just want to show you something, because when you will be doing polity, you will be discussing this concept of 5th and 6th schedule and the concept of special provisions for tribals. And I want you to show the origin of that. I want you to understand it. I want to show you the origin of how the British actually created the context in which we have the fifth and sixth schedule generally. So now the British saw one thing. The British actually saw a pattern, which is that there's no point fighting with the tribals. Rather, let's assimilate them. So they found it difficult to keep the tribals quiet. So rather, they tried to limit their interaction via non-interference with the tribals itself. So how did the British do it? Don't have to learn it, just look at it. In 1870, they started what is called the Government of India Act 1870. And now you try, if you have done polity, try to look at it and try to create a certain image. If you know the concept of tribal special provisions related to tribals, fifth and sixth schedule, try to look at it. See, the act conferred, do not learn. If you do not learn this much, I think you can remember than remembering anything that I write it down. The act conferred upon the government, the Governor General and Council, the power to approve as laws regulations made by local provinces, state governments for administration of certain special areas. So it provided some form of regulatory mechanism to protect the interest of the tribal areas, and many remedial measures were coming through. So now the first time the concept of special area comes in, and just replace the Governor General in Council and put in either President or Governor, and you get the original, the constitutional positions which we have today, or the constitutional provisions generally we have today. So in 1874, we will have what is called Scheduled District Act, that a scheduled district for the first time was introduced, under which the local government could declare any area as scheduled district for better administration of that area. Governor can declare any area as scheduled district or area. That is the provision right now. So the concept was given to the local governments at this point of time. So the concept of scheduled tribes and scheduled district comes from the 1874 Act. Further, the Government of India Act 1919, Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, very simply introduced a whole plethora of concepts. Empowered the Governor General and Council to declare an area backward, and it could be said as wholly excluded, modified excluded. Basically, the concept of, if you know, inner line permit, wherein in order to enter certain areas of tribal India, you need certain permissions. So the concept of wholly excluded area, which nobody can enter, and modified excluded area, where somebody can enter or some people can enter. Central and provincial governments had no power to make laws with respect to wholly excluded area. So if it's a totally wholly excluded area, autonomous district council concept comes out of here. The power was vested in the Governor General in Council, so the President, and it was for the better administration of tribal areas and tribal people. So you can see that the way we deal with fifth and sixth schedule, the base has already been made by the British. Further, in the Government of India Act 1935, there was again a classification of excluded and partially excluded. Excluded could be administered by the governor. Partially excluded could be then the responsibility of the minister of that provincial state. So there would be a tribal minister in that regard. So before I end the discussion for today, this was just to show you a certain picture. We have now covered, I am extremely grateful for your patience, because we've covered the two pain areas. We rather covered the three pain areas. We have now covered expansion. We've covered the concept of social justice reform and tribal peasant. So I hope all of you are alive. All of you have this energy to now go further. Simply, this was the most difficult part of the lecture, the most difficult part of the course. These three modules are always something which generally seem to be very difficult, not because they're difficult, because they're heavy. Now, I just want to thank you that generally you have cooperated well. You have shown enthusiasm and you've been through this pain with me. So now we are going to change our orientation from tomorrow. And from tomorrow, we will move towards 1857. Now, the point is, if you look at the larger story of modern India, we have actually really covered nothing. I'll show you how. I'll give you a very simple snapshot. I'll give you a very simple snapshot of what we have to cover. See, we started in 17, for example, we started in 1613, we went to 1651, then we went to 16, uh, you can say not 1651, we can go to 1717, 1757, 1765, 1813, 1833, 1853, and thereafter 1857. Ironically, we've only covered this much. We've actually covered only this much. All of this being what is called as Company Raj. Is called Company Raj. But what we actually have to cover is much, much, much more significant and much more important for you for the examination. The next 90 years are going to be extremely important, which is we have to now cover. We have to now cover. Our story will start with 1857. We'll talk about 1858, the Government of India Act. Then we'll talk about Indian Council Act 1861. Then we'll go to 1885, the formation of the INC. Then we'll go to 1892, the Indian Council Act of 1892 itself. Then we'll go to 1905 and discuss the partition of Bengal, Swadeshi movement itself. Then we'll go to 1907, the Surat split itself. Thereafter, we'll go to 1909, the Morley Minto reforms. Then we'll go to uh, we can go to 1915. We'll rather go to actually South Africa in between and discuss what was Gandhi doing there. Thereafter, we'll talk about 1915, which is advent of Gandhi. 1919, which is the Rowlatt Satyagraha itself. Then Jallianwala Bagh Rowlatt Satyagraha. 1920 to 22, the non-cooperation movement ending with Chauri Chaura. 1923, the Swarajist and no changes. Thereafter, 1927, Simon Commission. Thereafter, 1928, the concept of Nehru Report and Jinnah 14 points, 1929. 1929 is Jinnah 14 points plus you have the Purna Swaraj Resolution, Lahore Congress. Thereafter, 1930 to 34, we will discuss CDM. We will discuss first roundtable conference, second roundtable conference, third roundtable conference. Along with that, we'll discuss the first phase of CDM, second phase of CDM. We'll in between talk about Bhagat Singh. We'll talk about revolutionary activities in this sector, revolutionary activities in this sector. We'll also discuss the Gandhi impact. We'll talk about the reasons related to Bhagat Singh. Why was he martyred? I will bring a very interesting book with you. I'll give a very alternative perspective, the approvers concept, how they actually got to know about the Lahore conspiracy case. We will also discuss the concept of Gandhi impact. Was Gandhi in a position to save Bhagat Singh in that regard? Thereafter, we will go to Government of India Act 1935, then 1936 elections, thereafter 1938 and 39, 37, 38 is the period of what is called the tussle between Gandhi and Bose. We will discuss that. Thereafter, we'll go to 1940, August offer, 1941, individual satyagraha, 1942, Quit India and Cripps mission, then go to 1944, which is the period of now, again, the INA basically Imphal campaign and their surrender. 1945 becoming important, INA trials, Wavell conference. 1946, the RIN mutiny and cabinet mission, and 1947, Mountbatten, Ismay, and the partition. This is basically what really matters. This is basically what really matters. In between, there are micro dates here, but these are the dates which actually matter. And our story from tomorrow is going to now pivot towards this. We'll start with the revolt of 1857 and we'll end with giving India independence by the second week of May in that regard. So your orientation and your pain has now given you access to the next phase of the national movement or the next phase of modern India, which is the real phase. I will teach you how to summarize in this way. I will give you multiple timelines. I'll give you the trick to learn it. I'll try to make it logical. Everything is actually logically related. I will, unlike others, I will try to give you theoretical knowledge about how Gandhi, Bose, and Nehru and basically are in the same spectrum but different. We'll talk about the ideological battles. We'll talk about Dr. Ambedkar and Gandhi. We'll also talk about Bhagat Singh and his ideology. We'll also talk about how Gandhi in the later periods is going to become irrelevant, but how Gandhi is generally important for the Indian national movement. And we'll talk about Gandhi's moderate phase. We'll talk about moderates. We'll talk about extremists. We will Jinnah 14 points 29, 1929. The simple point of the matter is that now our story is different. Our story now does not revolve around the expansion, advent, consolidation. Now the British has already done what they had to do. We saw this period as the period of consolidation, from the expansion to the advent to the consolidation to economic policy to education policy to social justice reform movement and to tribal and peasant. Now our pace is done. Our orientation will now turn into the crown rule period, and question distribution is not there. No school level examination. Anywhere it can be pivoted. But the point is that very simply 1885 to 1947 is explicitly mentioned in the syllabus. It says Indian National Movement. So anything before 1885 or rather before 1857 in a way is considered secondary to this period. And as you will see, there is much more to this story than actually what we've seen. But as I said, if the student's base is very strong, if they understand the building blocks, advent to expansion to consolidation to economic policy to education policy to social, how they are actually connected to each other, then you will never struggle in doing this area, because this area is more interesting, it's much lighter, and it's more based on your own experience. You would have done it for sure in certain areas. It's just about changing your level and making it UPSC level. So before you leave for today, I hope that everything till this point makes sense, and you have now created a certain image in your mind about the way British expanded. Now we'll start the process of taking the British out of India. So I will give you a master timeline in the end. So don't worry about timelines. Whatever dates I've written to here are still incomplete, because 1916, 17, Home Rule League 15, Champaran, Kheda, Ahmedabad still are not there. But basically, now our story is going to become the real deal in that regard. And I will from time to time try to give you as much as academic and optional knowledge which is needed with regards to Bhagat Singh, with regards to Subhash Chandra Bose, with regards to INA. We'll discuss everything. So, why the British left in 1947 and why the 1857 revolt is not considered a war of independence, we'll all discuss all the issues. So, thank you. Take care. Thank you for your patience vis-a-vis these two modules. I already said Monday, Tuesday is going to be a little bit hard. From tomorrow, we will discuss 1857, the long-term causes of 1857, and thereafter we will discuss the course. We will discuss two theaters vis-a-vis Delhi and Kanpur in a lot of detail, Bibi Ghar and the concept of Sati Chaura Ghat, and thereafter we'll move into the implications of 1857, what is the nature, so that you can answer any question out of that. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. I hope it's making sense, because all these areas are very simply areas which students find difficult. I now hope that you are generally it's on your fingertips. Bye bye. Have a very productive day. See you tomorrow same time, but with a different module, and this one is not going to be like this. Thank you. Bye bye.